They said we have something called the tall poppy syndrome, that when one poppy grows up higher than the others, somebody comes along and cuts that off.
Do you think, you talked about going to the film school in Denmark or working with the Danish students. Certain cultures have less of a return with the elixir at the end, just as in life, that doesn't always happen?
Oh, I'm glad to talk about the differences from culture to culture, because this really just came up and hit me like I'd stepped on a rake or something. When I first started traveling, I found that I was carrying with me a bag of cultural assumptions that came from growing up in the Midwest. I lived on a farm most of my childhood, and my diet was entirely old Warner Brothers movies and cartoons and what was on television then, so Superman and Zorro and things like that. And there were a lot of cultural assumptions embedded in that, like the hero is a good force, the hero can change things, the hero can save us, the hero usually is unselfish and has the best interests of society in mind. And as soon as I got out of the frame of the United States of America, I started meeting all these other ideas that, for instance, in Eastern Europe, they would say to me, yeah, you mentioned these characters who think they can change the world and who think one person can make a difference. We actually have some of those, but we don't call them heroes. We call them fools and idiots, because nobody can really change the world. It just is how it is. And you're foolish if you think you can buck the system. So I began to understand that I needed to broaden my ideas. And some cultures were just outright disapproving of the term hero. And I've noticed that some people, like the screenwriting teacher in Denmark, had clipped out the word hero. And he didn't teach the hero's journey, he taught the journey. And I think that was actually a wise move, because it does away with a lot of cultural baggage that we have about heroes. When I first started teaching about it, people assumed, oh, you're talking about male heroes, because when we say hero, we usually mean a male hero. And I said, no, that's not the way I mean it. It could be any gender. It couldn't even be a genderless being, animal or spirit. So don't get hung up on gender or their natural equipment. But I began to see that I needed to broaden my view of things. And so different cultures have different emphasis. We in the West tend to gravitate towards stories that have a single hero, or at most what they call the two-hander, where there will be two people, like a buddy type story or a romance, where the two are kind of balanced equally. But a lot of cultures don't acknowledge stories like that at all, and they only think a story is something about a whole community or a group or a family. And so I've had to do some editing of my thoughts and try to get closer to a worldview rather than my own cultural view. It still has value, and it certainly translates around the world. Everybody kind of gets the Hollywood model, and they copy it a lot of places, but it's very healthy that they reject it in some ways and have their own standards and views about that, and I'm fine with that.
Sure, because I think in some cultures it's considered a bad thing to stand out.
That's
What is
right.
it? The nail that is the highest gets hammered down. There's different sayings. So yeah, but in ours, we're seduced by the individual who takes the reins and against all odds and rises up against the crowd. So yeah.
That's right. We hold it up as some high value that somebody puts their hand up, they volunteer, they stick out of the crowd. They're rugged individuals or something like that. But as you say, in other cultures, the base assumption is, no, we're all the same here, mate. As they told me in Australia, They said we have something called the tall poppy syndrome, that when one poppy grows up higher than the others, somebody comes along and cuts that off. So you better keep your head down and not stand out or not claim to be higher or better than everybody else. And I think this is a real difference in cultures, that the Western culture, American movie culture, is generally pretty aspirational. It's aiming for or striving for greater achievement, more risk, greater reward, sort of selling that idea that you don't get without you give some risk. And so that's not believed in every culture, and that has to be taken into account.
I don't know, this may get, I'm not trying to go political here, but in American films too, the individual takes on the corporation, the government, whereas maybe in some countries that could be a death sentence. They wouldn't make it. And so just the risk of how we may appear too brash or foolish, I don't know where I'm going with this. But
yeah, I think that there's a tendency in Western culture and Hollywood movie making to think that unless the story involves somebody who steps up and who does the extraordinary thing, who takes the great risk, then that's a story not worth telling. And I have just seen a documentary, I'm sorry I can't remember the name of it, but it had something to do with people who were running bird rescues in India. And they had this certain kind of bird of prey called it's a scavenger really, called a kite. And the kites were just dropping out of the sky because of pollution. And so these two brothers, had decided that that was their mission in life, was to rescue these birds and give decent burial to the ones who died and nurse the other ones along. And the end of the story was actually quite hopeless. And it painted this sad picture of a world where their little efforts were not making any difference at all. And the forces of the world were converging more and more so that there would be less and less of these birds and more problems. But there was something, although it was very sad, there was something noble about it, the fact that they were trying anyway. And so it was a challenging thing to me from my Western perspective, because I kept hoping that they would have a breakthrough, or that they'd get a government grant, or that they'd somehow, turn around this pollution situation. But they didn't give me that, and that was okay, because I felt something that I don't normally feel, which is this sense of despair, that there are certain things going on in the world we can't do anything about. But isn't it wonderful when somebody tries? So you got a little bit of both views with that one. And I think that's the balance we look for. A totally grim outlook on life is hard. That's hard to watch for anybody in any culture. But the balance is what I think is healthy.